He didn't need a gun. He didn't need a knife. All he needed was a smile and a fake cast on his arm. With just a few polite words, Ted Bundy convinced dozens of young women to willingly step into his car, never realizing it would be their last ride. He wasn't a raving lunatic screaming in the streets. He didn't crawl through alleys like some shadow in the night. He appeared under a flawless disguise, a bright law student, soft-spoken, well-educated, and above all, undeniably charming. The media called him America's most handsome serial killer. The police called him a monster who knew how to smile. You may have once sat next to someone just like him, without ever suspecting a thing. Because the real monster doesn't show its claws. It wears a white shirt, has a college degree, and says thank you. This video contains disturbing descriptions and references to murder violence and disordered psychological behavior. Its purpose is to analyze and raise awareness, not to glorify or promote any individual or act. If you're under 16 alone or sensitive to violent material, please consider carefully before continuing. Before America called him a serial killer, before the police labeled him a monster, he was simply Ted, the kind of man any mother would proudly introduce to her daughter. Ted Bundy was born in 1946 in Vermont, into a strict Catholic household. From a young age, he was noticeably more intelligent than his peers. He spoke calmly, was always polite, always composed. He wasn't a troublemaker. He wasn't a loner. On the contrary, he stood out. As he grew older, Bundy studied psychology at the University of Washington. Professors were impressed by his intellect. Friends liked him for his helpfulness. And women were drawn to his neat appearance, deep eyes, and that half smile that made them feel understood. Ted knew how to read people. He knew exactly what to say to make others trust him. He knew how to create a sense of safety, even with complete strangers. To society, Bundy wasn't just normal. He was exceptional. The golden candidate for any role, lawyer, politician, leader. Even when he enrolled in law school, no one questioned him. No one noticed the little things, the way he stared at women just a bit too long, the coldness when he was rejected, or the quiet rage behind that perfectly polite facade. Because those things felt too small to matter, too easy to overlook, when they came from someone who was well-dressed, well-educated, and well-liked. People often say, the devil doesn't come with horns and a pitchfork. He comes in a suit with a charming smile, and Bundy was the embodiment of that. The truth is, he didn't dwell in darkness. He was part of the light, welcomed by society, respected and trusted. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath it was a deeply disturbed mind, repressed, disguised, and hidden beneath the mask of perfection. There's an old saying that never stops being true. The best killer is the one who convinces you he would never do it. And that is exactly why Ted Bundy became the nightmare America never woke up from. It started slowly, quietly, without a pattern anyone could see at first. In early 1974, in the Pacific Northwest, young women began disappearing, one by one, without struggle, without witnesses, without a trace. Most were college students, smart, kind, full of life. They left their dorms, walked across campus, headed to class, or went out to run errands, and they never returned. Police were baffled. There were no bodies, no blood, no signs of forced entry, no screams. The only clue repeated over and over again in witness reports was this. She was last seen walking with a man. He was wearing a sling, said his arm was broken, asked her for help carrying something to his car. The man always had the same approach. He looked clean, normal, polite. Sometimes he dropped a stack of books. Other times he fumbled with keys near a tan Volkswagen Beetle. He'd ask for help. Just a minute, just a favor. And the women, believing they were helping someone injured, followed him. Once they reached the car, everything changed. He'd strike fast, violent, calculated. In many cases, he used a crowbar hidden inside the car. He'd hit them from behind. They'd never even see it coming. Then he'd push the unconscious body into the car and drive off, vanishing into the night, just like his victims. By mid-1974, panic began to spread across campuses in Washington State and Oregon. Women were warned not to walk alone. Flyers were posted. Curfews implemented. But the disappearances continued. The police were flooded with calls, theories, and false leads. Some thought the women had run away. Others whispered about a cult, a sex trafficker, a stalker who lived in the woods. But no one had a name, no license plate, no face. Until one day, a woman survived. She reported a man who approached her at a lake wearing a sling, calling himself Ted. He asked for help loading a sailboat. She agreed, following him toward the parking lot. But something didn't feel right. His voice, the way he kept glancing around. And when she hesitated, he became pushy, too pushy. She ran. Her statement would later become the thread that unraveled everything. The man's name was Ted. He drove a tan Volkswagen Beetle. He was pretending to be injured. It wasn't much, but it was more than anyone had. Still, the police hesitated. There was no fingerprint, no DNA, just a vague description and a first name Ted. And yet by this time, 8 women had already disappeared. Some people still didn't believe it was one man. Others couldn't accept that someone so normal could be a predator. But the pattern was forming. A methodical hunter was stalking his prey, and his name was starting to rise from the fog. For months, the name Ted floated in police reports like a ghost. There was no last name, no photo, no evidence that could stick. Until August 16th, 1970. In the early morning hours, a Utah Highway Patrol officer spotted a suspicious vehicle, a tan Volkswagen Beetle, slowly circling a residential neighborhood. The driver didn't seem drunk, but he was certainly watching. Not the road, but the houses, the windows. The officer pulled him over. The man behind the wheel introduced himself as Theodore Robert Bundy. He was calm, smiled politely, said he was just lost looking for a friend's place. But when asked to open the trunk, something changed. His voice tensed. His hands hesitated. Inside the trunk, police found what they would later call a rape kit, a ski mask, another mask made from pantyhose, handcuffs, rope, an ice pick, a crowbar, duct tape, garbage bags. Bundy offered explanations for everything. The ski mask. It's cold at night. The rope, camping supplies. The crowbar, just in case the car broke down, and the pantyhose mask. A joke, he said, chuckling. The officer didn't laugh. Bundy was arrested, and for the first time, his double life began to crack open. Investigators began connecting him to multiple disappearances. The tan Beetle, the sling, the charming smile, the name Ted. Surviving witnesses began identifying him in photo lineups. But despite the evidence, Bundy remained collected, never panicking, never confessing. He hired lawyers, he studied the case files, he played the role of the wrongly accused man to perfection. And yet, in 1976, he was convicted not of murder, but of attempted kidnapping. It was a start, but no one yet realized the depth of the horror. Bundy was sentenced to prison in Utah. A small victory, a moment of breath for investigators across multiple states. But Ted Bundy wasn't finished. In June 1977, while awaiting trial for a murder charge in Colorado, Bundy was allowed to visit the law library in the courthouse alone, unshackled. There, he opened a window and jumped. He landed safely, disappeared into the nearby mountains, and vanished for 6 days before being recaptured. Police were stunned. But they didn't make the same mistake twice, or so they thought. Just 6 months later, in December 1977, Bundy escaped again. This time through a tiny hole in the ceiling of his jail cell, losing 30 pounds to fit through the opening. He climbed into the ceiling, broke into a janitor's closet, and walked out the front door dressed as a civilian. By the time authorities realized he was gone, Bundy had already crossed state lines. He resurfaced in Florida, a new city, a new name, a fresh hunting ground, and within just a few weeks, the nightmare began again. January 15th, 1978. Ted Bundy entered the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. In less than 15 minutes, he brutally attacked 4 women, killing 2 of them with a piece of firewood and severely injuring the others. He wasn't careful anymore. He didn't hide in shadows. He unleashed everything he had kept beneath the mask for years. This was no longer a man trying to deceive the world. This was a predator, unhinged, desperate, and spiraling into chaos. From a polite law student to a violent fugitive, the transformation was complete. And yet people still struggled to believe it. But he was so charming, they said. He didn't look like a killer. But Ted Bundy had never needed to look like a killer. He only needed to look like someone you'd trust. Ted Bundy wasn't just a killer. He was a planner, a manipulator, a predator who understood people not to connect with them, but to control them. At the core of Bundy's psychological profile is what experts call antisocial personality disorder, SPD, a severe mental condition marked by a lack of empathy, disregard for others, and an inability to feel guilt or remorse. But Bundy was no out-of-control madman. He was cold, strategic, calculating. He didn't lash out blindly. He hunted carefully, methodically. Bundy was known to study his victims. He chose women who were petite, with brown hair parted in the middle, often resembling a woman from his past. They were college students, independent, smart, but above all, they were trusting. That's what Bundy needed. He didn't want victims who screamed or ran. He wanted control, total control. This aligns with what psychologists call a control fetish, a psychological need not just to overpower someone, but to dominate every step of their decision-making process. He didn't drag his victims into the car. He lured them. Let them say yes. Let them walk willingly. By the time they realized the truth, it was too late. Bundy also benefited from what's known as the halo effect, a cognitive bias, where people assume that if someone has one good quality, they must have others. Bundy was attractive, clean-cut, articulate, so people assumed he must be safe, trustworthy, harmless. But that deadly assumption was his weapon. In many ways, Bundy didn't just kill his victims physically. He dismantled their sense of reality. He turned their kindness into vulnerability, their trust into a trap. And for him, it wasn't just about the act. It was about the game. Bundy once said that murder is not just violence, it's possession. He saw victims as objects, pieces to be moved. He treated the process like a strategy game, like chess. First, he'd select a piece, observe from afar. Then he'd approach with calculated charm. Next, he'd test a fake injury, a soft voice, a request for help. If the piece responded, he made his move. Every step was deliberate, every moment crafted, and like a master chess player, Bundy thought several moves ahead. He knew where he'd park, where he'd strike, where he'd hide the body. He even revisited the corpses of some victims long after they were dead, to maintain a twisted sense of ownership. There was nothing impulsive about what he did. It was ritual, precision, routine. Even when he got caught, Bundy adjusted. He studied court procedures, defended himself, turned the trial into a performance his stage. That's the terrifying part. Bundy wasn't insane in the traditional sense. He was sane enough to function, smart enough to charm, and sick enough to enjoy the whole process. Many serial killers are driven by rage trauma or psychosis. Bundy's motive was simpler, darker power. The power to manipulate. The power to make someone trust him. The power to decide whether they lived or died. He didn't just take lives, he took control. And perhaps the most haunting truth of all is that even now, decades after his execution, Ted Bundy still controls how we think about evil. By the time Ted Bundy was finally brought to trial for the Chi Omega sorority house murders in 1979, he was no longer just a suspect. He was a national obsession. The media flooded the courtroom. Reporters jostled for space. Every newspaper headline, every evening news segment featured the same face, clean-cut. Handsome, calm, the face of a man accused of murdering at least 30 women. And yet, Bundy wasn't intimidated, he was energized. Unlike most defendants, he refused a lawyer. He insisted on defending himself, acting not as the accused, but as the attorney. Dressed in a suit, carrying folders, questioning witnesses, Bundy performed in court. He objected. He made arguments. He smiled at the cameras. To many in the room, it looked like he was enjoying himself, and he was. This wasn't a trial, it was his stage. Psychologists watching closely saw what most people missed. Bundy wasn't fighting for innocence. He was reclaiming control. Courtrooms are structured hierarchical. They give power to those who speak, who argue, who persuade. Bundy didn't just want to escape conviction. He wanted to manipulate the narrative. And then, in a moment that left the courtroom stunned, he proposed. In the middle of his murder trial, Bundy turned to Carol Ann Boone, a former co-worker and longtime admirer who had stood by his side throughout the proceedings. He asked her to marry him. She said yes. Right there under oath in front of the judge, it became legally binding. The courtroom gasped, cameras clicked furiously, and Bundy smiled. It was theatrical, absurd, disturbing, but it was also revealing. Bundy wasn't trying to win the case. He was trying to win the room. Experts agree Bundy displayed classic traits of narcissistic personality disorder combined with antisocial tendencies. He lacked remorse. He lacked empathy. But he possessed a dangerous charm and a need to be admired even as he stood accused of horrifying crimes. He was a master of manipulation, and the courtroom was just another setting for him to control. He questioned witnesses with confidence. He used legal jargon to sound intelligent. He made jokes that made jurors laugh, yes, laugh, during a murder trial. That's the power of a charming predator. He doesn't scare you, he seduces you. And the most chilling part, it almost worked. Despite the overwhelming evidence, eyewitness accounts, bite mark analysis, blood, Bundy still managed to plant doubt in some minds. Not because he proved his innocence, but because he looked so normal. Because people still said, he doesn't seem like a killer. He's so well-spoken. He was in law school. This is the danger of intelligence without conscience, of charm without morality, of a man who knows exactly how to make people feel safe right before he destroys them. Bundy's courtroom theatrics weren't just self-defense. They were the final chapter of his long-running illusion that he was in control, that he was smarter than everyone else, that he could twist truth into performance and walk away clean. But not this time. In 1980, Ted Bundy was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, 3 counts of attempted murder, and sentenced to death. Yet even then, he showed no remorse, no tears, no apology, just that same smile. And as the guards led him away, you could still hear the whispers among the crowd. He didn't seem like the type. But Ted Bundy was the perfect type. The kind who never looked like a killer until it was too late. On January 24, 1989, at 7:06 a.m., Ted Bundy was executed in Florida State Prison. After years of trials, appeals, interviews, and psychological evaluations, after decades of fear, fascination, and media frenzy, it was over. He was strapped to the electric chair, his head shaved, his ankles bound. And as the final switch was thrown, 2,000 volts surged through his body. Outside the prison, hundreds of people gathered. Cheering, they held signs that read, "Burn, Bundy, burn." They lit fireworks, drank beer, played loud music. Some wore t-shirts with his name and a lightning bolt. To them, this was not an execution. It was a celebration. The death of a monster. For the families of victims, it was the moment justice finally arrived. For the media, it was the climax of a national obsession. And for the public, it was closure. Or so they thought. Ted Bundy's final words were hauntingly simple. "Give my love to my family and friends." No confession, no apology, no acknowledgement of the horror he caused. Just another controlled statement, one last moment of performance. But as the crowd cheered, as news anchors reported the event live, a question still lingered, quietly in the background. How many more are out there? How many monsters wear a smile? How many Ted Bundys are still walking among us, disguised, waiting, watching? The man was dead, but the fear he represented, that evil could look normal, was very much alive. And that's why decades later, we still tell his story. Because the most terrifying killer is not the one who hides in the dark. It's the one who walks confidently in the daylight and makes you trust him. Why did Ted Bundy kill? Was it his childhood? He was born out of wedlock, raised believing his mother was his sister. Some psychologists suggest early shame and identity confusion may have fueled a fractured sense of self. Was it society? He grew up during a time when mental health was misunderstood, when signs of deviance were overlooked if someone looked normal. Ted was handsome, polite, educated. People ignored red flags because he didn't seem dangerous. Or was it something deeper, something primal? Bundy himself once admitted that he had violent fantasies from an early age. He described them as uncontrollable urges, like a pressure building in his mind that needed release. This points to what some experts describe as a psychopathic drive, a lack of empathy combined with a compulsive need for dominance, control, and gratification. He didn't kill in a fit of rage. He planned. He hunted. Each murder was like a rehearsal, ritualistic, methodical, intentional. Could someone like him have been stopped earlier? Possibly. But society wasn't looking in the right direction. People searched for monsters in the shadows. No one thought to question the charming guy in a suit, the man who opened doors for strangers and smiled during interviews. And that is the true legacy of Ted Bundy. Not just the lives he took, but the trust he shattered. He made the world more suspicious. He blurred the line between good and evil. He forced people to ask themselves, what if the next killer looks like someone I admire? What if evil doesn't look like evil at all? In the aftermath, Bundy left more than victims. He left a scar on society's perception of safety, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who knows how to smile, speak well, and earn your trust before taking it all away.